scored. Of course, later on, I went on to do my, post-graduation through correspondence because I wanted to get admission into an MBA institute. And for that, the bare minimum requirement was 50%, which I did get 50% in my post-graduation. But the bad news is that I was an academic retard. But I also told you that there's a good news. And the good news is that none of my academic, qualifications impacted on my career progression. Because in over a career span of around 20 years, I have led huge teams in organizations like IBM, where I was a service desk delivery leader, the country leader for India's South Asia region. I also work with NIT Technologies in the capacity of country head for its center in Philippines. My last organization was Sterling, which is world's biggest background and identity services organization headquartered in the United States of America. And now I have opened my own consultancy. I'm working with more than around 100 companies to give consultancy on managing their people, managing their businesses. This is called Bliss Ocean. And the most important role that I play in this organization is that of Chief Transformation Officer, because I help people to transform their businesses, transform their lives, and give them some hope. And I'm hoping that, by whatever little that I have spoken to you by now has given you some hope, because if I can do it, my dear friends, each one of you can do it too. And therefore, I think there's a reason for me to let you know as to how did that journey happen from $200 per annum to $100,000 per annum. And how did I, transition from being a zero to, I love to call myself as a hero. It's a, self-claimed title that I give to myself. But I want to tell you as to, how has this journey been? I'm going to be sharing a few stories from my life to exhibit as to what the topic of our discussion today is. So it's time for you to celebrate. Why I'm saying is that it's time for you to celebrate is because if somebody like me who can, do it, I'm sure each one of you can, because I'm sure that each one of you who's sitting in this room would have scored more than 63% in class 10th, more than 63% in class 12, more than 43% in graduation, right? Now, if I can do it, each one of you can. So what I want you to do for a minute is just close your eyes. If you don't have your headphones on, put on your headphones, okay, and listen to this music for 1 minute in anticipation for a very bright future that you have for yourselves.
आवाज तो आई नहीं ने.
Can you hear the music? Sorry, were you able to hear the music?
No, I can't hear.
Music नहीं सुनाई दे रहे राज.
Okay, so I think we'll skip it for the moment, because I think because my AirPod is on, you were not able to listen to the music. But the idea was that, I think I want to give reason to each one of the fellow students here to understand that each one of us has an opportunity to make it big in life. And may I request somebody to, everybody to put themselves on mute, because I can,
Yes.
Okay. So there's a story that I want to tell you. Like Professor Naik said that, I'm also a storyteller. So I like to tell stories. This is a couple of stories from my life. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So, one day I was getting ready for work. I had a client meeting at 9 a.m. and I was having my breakfast. All of a sudden, I realized that this is my daughter, who was 6 years at that time, came running towards me. She tripped and she fell on me. As a result of which, I had a glass of juice in my hand that spilled all over me. The first reaction was that I got angry, shouted at her, "Aren't you a grown-up kid? what have you done? I was telling that to a 6-year-old daughter. I went off to change into fresh clothes. When I came down, I realized that she was crying, and she said that she didn't want to go to school. After a lot of pampering her, and in the process, she had also missed her school bus. I kind of pampered her, and I said that I will be dropping her to school, which I did on that day. But what happened is, on the way there was this traffic cop who caught me. I wasted another 10 minutes negotiating, but I landed up paying for the ticket. When we reached the school, my daughter opened the door of the car and went inside running the school without even looking at me. And when I reached office, I was late by around 45 minutes. And needless to say that it was a bad day because I lost the deal that day. It was a $1 million deal that we had to sign up. We lost that. More importantly, what I lost was a momentary trust that my daughter had on me for that period of time, because when I reached home, she didn't even look at me and she went off to sleep. So we will use this story as base to understand the three lessons in life. The first lesson is that life is not accidental. uh, it is between life happens to us between effect and cause, right? Most of the people, most of the times, put ourselves onto the effect side of the equation. When I say effect side of the equation, most of us suffer from something called victimitis exuditis, which means that we consider ourselves to be victims. We always have excuses for things that happen to us. We blame people, we blame situations. Most of the us focus on the problems and not on solutions. We don't own responsibility for what has happened to us. We give others the power to run our lives. For example, even it is made up in our language when we say, he made us upset. He made me crazy. Even intangible things like, this faulty startometer is winding me up. So what we are doing is we are giving the power to somebody else as to how and what we should feel, okay? Because we put ourselves onto the effect side of the equation. Most of us, most of the times, blame other people, situations, conditions when things do not go in our favor in our life, right? Well, there are some of us who put ourselves onto the cause side of the equation, because some of us feel that we can make a difference. Some of us feel that we can make things happen. We are responsible for how we feel. We have the ability to respond rather than react to the curveballs that life throws at us. The locus of control is within us. So let's say, for example, in the story that I told you, where did I put myself in that equation? I put myself on the effect side of the equation because I reacted, right? I felt that I was a victim of my 6-year-old daughter who fell on me. As a result of which, I screwed up the entire day, right, and had a miserable day that day because I put myself at the effect side of the equation. Now, if I would have put myself at the cause side of the equation, I would not have reacted. All that I would have done was to go to the bathroom, change into fresh clothes. She would have gone to her school in the school bus. I would have gone to my office, and I would have reached time and probably signed $1 million deal. I screwed up my day because I put myself onto the effect side of the equation. Now you have to ask yourself that whenever there is a time when the time is not good as per your expectations, what do? Do you blame people? Let's say, for example, many times it happens that if I did not or somebody else did not get promoted in the organization, they would blame their bosses, they would blame the politics, they would blame on everybody, right? So we put ourselves onto the effect side of the equation, whether we are at work or in our personal lives. So the lesson number one is that we need to start putting ourselves onto the cause side of the equation, because nothing in our life happens without take ourselves taking the responsibility for that situation, even if that situation is outside of our control. Now, there would be many people who would say that, we are in the era of coronavirus 19, COVID-19. This is outside of our control. What can we do? There will be so many job losses. We may not get the right kind of jobs that we're looking for. Okay, if we think like that, let me tell you, my dear friends, we are putting ourselves onto the effect side of the equation. We have to put ourselves onto the cause side of the equation so that we can take charge of our lives. And how do we do that? We will talk about it subsequently. Is it okay? Am I going fast?
It's fine, perfectly, Raj.
Okay. The second is 10-90 rule. Now, the 10-90 rule says that our life is 10% of what happens to us. 90% of it depends upon how do we respond to the situations that we have no control in, right? Now, in my example, that day, 10% was only what happened to me. That, I had my daughter had fallen on me, and, juice had spilled all over me. It was only 10%. But I screwed up the entire day, okay? And I mean, it was really a bad day because, like I told you, on a professional front and on a personal front, only if I would have responded appropriately in the situation, right? So 90% of our life is in within our hands, because it depends upon how do we respond to that situation. If I would have, what I did was I just reacted and shouted on my daughter, right? And that screwed up the entire thing. All that I could have done is would have appropriately responded by, going to my room, changing into fresh clothes, and then the results of that day would have been completely different. So all of us, we need to understand that 10% of our life is what happens to us. 90% is how do we respond to the situations we have no control in. So I see COVID-19 as only 10% of it has happened to me. Okay, what is the outcome of that would depend upon how do I choose to respond in this situation. Okay, and I choose to respond in this situation by maintaining physical distancing. I choose to respond in this situation by empowering myself by reading a lot. I respond to this situation by conducting webinars, right? So that is the response. But and there are so many people who are kind of trepidated by the feeling of what will happen, job losses will happen, the economy is going to go down. Then we are putting ourselves onto the effect side of the equation. Now we need to understand that these things will always happen. Life is a struggle. Life is not a linear, it's not a straight line. For example, in 1976 the global economy was at around $6 trillion, right? And we've seen multiple things happening between 1975 to 2020. The global GDP for until I think last year was around $76 trillion. In over around 40 years, there's been so much of financial success despite the blips that we would have seen in global recessions, in pandemics like SARS, so and so forth. So we need to understand that we need to start taking control of our lives, because 90% of our life depends upon how do we respond. It is only 10% of the things will happen whereby things will go wrong, and things will always go wrong, but we need to take charge of our lives. So that is what is 10-90 rule of life. The third is the stimulus and response. Now, this is a statement that was given by Dr. Viktor Frankl, who's written a beautiful book, which is by the name of In Search of Meaning, Man's Search of for Meaning. And he says that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space, we have a freedom to choose. And in those choices lie our happiness and growth. Now, I repeat this because this is extremely important for us to understand. Between stimulus, now stimulus in the case that I had told you was that my daughter had spilled juice on me, right? That was a stimulus. My response was that I shouted at her, right? It was not a response, it was actually a reaction. Now, between the stimulus and response, there is a space. Now, that day, I did not choose to use that space. I only reacted. I didn't give any time for that space. So, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space, we have a choice. Now, I had a choice not to react, right? I had a choice to respond. In that space, we have a choice, we have a freedom to choose, and in those choices lie our growth and happiness. So we need to understand that we don't have to react to the situations. We have to use the space and then respond accordingly. And that is why, it's an old saying that, whenever you're angry, what you need to do is you need to start counting backwards in your mind from 10 to 1. Because what is it allowing you? It is in a way allowing you to choose the space between stimulus and response. So I think these three rules are extremely important if we want to take charge of our lives, because we need to understand that our life is a product of our decisions and not our conditions, right? It's a product of our decisions. If I would have decided not to shout on my daughter that day, if I would have decided to go to directly to my bathroom to change into fresh clothes, okay, the outcome would have been completely different, right? So, and it's not a product of my conditions. Even if the juice had fallen on me, that was a condition, okay? But my life was not dependent upon that condition. My life would have depended upon my decision, right? So life is a product of our decisions and not our conditions. Now there's a beautiful video that I wanted to show, but for some reason I don't think so that you will be able to hear the sound of the video. But were you able to watch it, the previous video? So what I'll do is I'll run the video. In any case, you may not be able to make you may not be able to listen to it, but I think visually you will be able to make some sense. Is that okay?
Yeah, Raj, just 1 second. This is Dr. Gupta here. 1 second, I'll interrupt you. Just share the
Yeah.
computer video in your app. Then I think we'll see the sound.
Sorry, what?
Share the computer audio in your app, and then we can hear your video voice also.
Okay, let me try.
When you share, there is a left side, there's a computer audio or something is there. Just share that also. Just click on that.
Okay. For some reason, I am not able to see that. I'm sorry. But what I'll do is I'll run the video because it's quite visually appealing. So I think we'll be able to make sense out of that.
Excellent.
But for now, I think because of we don't have luxury of time, I will just go and run that video.
My name is Jessica Cox, and I live in Tucson, Arizona. I'm a motivational speaker. I've traveled to 17 different countries. My situation of being born in the mountains requires a lot of grace. I was young, the kids around me climbing up the monkey bars or climbing up the slide, and for me, I felt somewhat frustrated because I was prevented from that. I wanted to run up and climb up that slide just like all the other kids. Sometimes I would envision flying over a playground and being Superwoman. I realized that I needed to adapt to the way everyone else did things. And it wasn't about catering to my needs or my special situation, but it was more about me adapting and being creative and coming up with ways of using my feet or using other methods to become independent. Put my pants onto the hook, then I just step into the pants like this, and I wiggle my way into my pants. I've heard the saying a number of times that life is 10% what happens to you, 90% of how you respond to it. So that's why I fell in love with psychology. Psychology fascinated me in that sense that it really did credit a lot to how we thought. It was a 3-year process to become a pilot. I had to find a specific airplane, and it has 2 less controls than most standard airplanes. And so, therefore, I can actually keep my right foot on the yoke and my left foot on the throttle. Most incredible, most empowering experience I've ever had. It's that feeling of being free, of being, in the sky, and just that incredible feeling of being up there.
Okay, so I'm sorry that you were not able to listen to what she said, but I think through the video we would have been able to make sense of it. That her name is Jessica Cox. She was born without hands, right? Despite her limitation, she was able to do so many things. She was able to become a pilot, the only pilot, woman pilot, and the only pilot who flies planes without arms. She also became a master black belt in taekwondo. She's a motivational speaker. Now, 10% of her life was what happened to her, right? She was born without her hands. But 90% of her life depended upon how did she choose to respond to, the situations, right? Now, whenever I feel sad in my life, okay, I go back to remembering this video and ask myself, should I not be ashamed of myself? I am feeling bad because of the situation. She was born without hands and she could make her life. What stops me to take control of my life? Everything that happens to me, then I consider it as a 10%. Then I work on 90% of, deciding how do I want to respond to that situation, because I know that 90% of my life is dependent upon how I choose to control my life, right? And I think it's important for all of us to understand that whenever we are grumpy, whenever we feel bad, whenever we blame other people or situations, just remember that we are putting ourselves onto the effect side of the equation. And when we place ourselves onto the effect side of the equation, then it will only lead to our own misery and nobody else's. So there has to be a paradigm shift that has to happen in our mindset, that we have to start putting ourselves onto the cause side of the equation, because 90% of our life depends upon what we do in our lives. Is that clear?
Right.
Okay. There's another story that I want to share. And this story goes like this. All of us have a circle of concern in our lives. For some, it is like, I'm not getting married. For some, it is like, I'm not getting a job. For some, it is like, I'm not getting admission into a great, into a good B school. For some, it is that, my kids don't listen to me. So everybody has some concerns, right? We have a circle of concern, right? So what happened was, I'm going to share with you a circle of concern that I had when I had moved to Philippines as country head for NIT Technologies um, a few years back. I always had this knack to to be able to conduct sessions like these, but I had no experience in, because I had always managed operational roles. I was always into leading businesses. I was never into uh, you know um, never into training or facilitating programs. So when I went to Philippines, I thought that it was a good opportunity for me to kind of get into this. I discussed this with the HR leader there, and I told her that I want to start some knowledge exchange programs, whereby we invite people or professionals from other organizations to our organization, and they take sessions. I go to other organizations, and I conduct sessions for people. So there was a lot of resistance, and that resistance was fair, right? It was like, I was new to the country. Nobody knew me, who I was. I had absolutely no professional experience in training. I had absolutely no marketing budget, because that was my self effort. It was not sponsored by my organization. Why would my organization want to spend money on something that I want to do? Uh, there were questions like, even if you schedule one session, how will you get the footfalls, because of the reasons listed above? And I was told that it will not be a success, right? Because there's always a circle of concern, and that was a real concern, right? Because I had nothing, okay, on my platter, which I could say that I can conduct transformational learning programs. So what I did was, and I was told by many leaders there is that, Raj, forget about it. This can't, this is not workable. So what I did was that I understood that there's something called a circle of concern. There's also a circle of influence. Now, my circle of influence at that point in time was very small, very, very small in comparison to the circle of concern, right? But then I started thinking of as to how do I increase my circle of influence. So the circle of concern was that orange color circle, and circle of influence, we'll use it as green colored circle. So how do I want to make my circle of influence bigger? So what I started doing was that I started, sending requests on LinkedIn to all top honchos in the Philippines. Okay, I would have probably sent requests to around 400 or 500, heads of all the organizations in Philippines on LinkedIn. Out of those 400 or 500, I would have got acceptance only for around 100 by, from 100 or 200 people, right? I then sent a mail to those who accepted my LinkedIn request regarding that, I am, starting this program where I'm going to be training professionals, employees of organizations. I will be training HR leaders on employee engagement. I will be training business leaders on how to manage their people, how to run their businesses, and so on and so forth. So when I sent a mail to all of them, out of around 200 people who would have accepted my LinkedIn request, I got the acceptance and the nominations only by from around 20 or 30 people. See, from around 3,000 people that I sent the request to ultimate nominations by around 20-30 people for the session. So this is how I kind of increased or expanded my circle of influence. Not a big deal, right? But at least there was some expansion that happened. As a result of which, what happened? This was my first batch of 24 professionals. So there were 24 companies in the Philippines who nominated their senior leaders for a session. Okay, and the session that I had conducted at that point in time was Habits of 7 Highly Effective People. So I had 24 people in my first session. In this first session, one of the people happened to be a participant from IBPAP. Now, IBPAP is, NASSCOM's counterpart. What NASSCOM to India is, IBPAP is to Philippines. So one of the participants was from IBPAP. He kind of really liked the session. And I got an offer that there are around 700 to 800 organizations that are affiliated to IBPAP. And IBPAP would like to collaborate with me for me to conduct these sessions for the organizations in the Philippines, right? As a result of which, I got impaneled with IBPAP to, I can hear a little background noise. Thank you. So I got impaneled with IBPAP to run these sessions. And in a little over 3 years, I would have conducted 50 to 60 sessions. In all, I would have, facilitated programs for more than 1,500 participants. Now, if I were to do a session today, all that I have to do is write a mail to IBPAP, and at any point in time, I will have around 2,000 participants coming for my session. Now, can you understand that, I had a circle of concern. It was a big circle, okay? All of us has those circles of concerns, but we had that power to expand our circle of influence. Now, it's a small beginning. It was a very small beginning for me to send LinkedIn requests to people, right? But I did not know that this small effort is going to result in a big, huge, success for me, that it will change the trajectory of my career life, right? Not only this, what happened was I was invited, and I'm regularly invited in the Philippines to conduct these sessions. I was given a red carpet welcome, okay, by this organization that I'm talking about. I was made to fly by a chartered plane to one of the best islands in the world, that is called El Nido, right? And I was there with 40 beautiful women. I was the only male there, right, to conduct a session for them on effectiveness, right? So what I want to tell you is that success depends upon our ability to increase or expand the circle of influence. And then the circle of influence expands, the circle of concern shrinks, right? Now, circle of concern will not completely shrink because,
Raj,
every time
sorry
we
to
will have some
interrupt.
concerns.
Raj,
Yeah,
we have to
yeah,
rejoin again at 2:40 p.m. Right? There's 2 minutes
okay,
left. After that, we'll have to rejoin again. Yeah,
okay,
please
I'll do that.
continue. Yes,
Sure.
yes.
Sure. So what we have to do is, because I told you that 90% of our life depends upon our responses, we need to always start looking at expanding our circle of influence. Because when we expand our circle of influence, our circle of concern will shrink. And when our circle of concern shrinks, then we know that, the concerns are becoming lesser and lesser, and we are exhibiting and exerting more influence on our lives. Many few people do this. Now, people don't do this because people don't understand that 90% of our life depends upon how we respond to the situations. In my case, the situation was that I was not known in Philippines. There was absolutely no way that I could make a mark in Philippines. But by taking small steps, I was able to make a mark. Okay. Now, not only was I made to fly to one of the best islands in the world, I get paid for these workshops also. As a result of which, what I have done is it has become so successful that I decided to leave my corporate job and set up my own concern by the name of Bliss Ocean, because I can earn more than what I was earning working for somebody else. Just by a small action that I took, which I did not know will result in such a huge success. So what we have to start learning to do is expanding our circle of influence, by virtue of which we will, reduce or shrink the circle of concern. Human beings do the other way around. We focus on circle of concern and we forget about circle of influence.